My husband thought he had committed the perfect crime. He left for a business trip, leaving his paralyzed son and me locked inside a house filling with gas. He expected to come home to a funeral. Instead, he came home to a war. But the biggest shock wasn't the murder attempt. It was what happened the moment his car disappeared down the street. My stepson, the boy, who hadn't moved his legs in 4 years, jumped out of his wheelchair like a track star to save my life. My name is Jasmine, and this is the story of how I found out my marriage was a death trap. Before I tell you what Trey said to me in that kitchen, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. If you have ever felt like someone was smiling to your face while holding a knife behind your back, this story is for you. The heavy front door clicked shut with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. I stood by the window pulling back the silk drapes just an inch to watch Darius walk to his car. He looked immaculate in his charcoal suit, the very picture of a successful Atlanta real estate mogul and a devoted father. He paused by the driver's side of his black Porsche, looked up at the house one last time, and flashed that charming smile that had fooled half the city. He waved, thinking I was watching. I was, but not with love. I was watching with the exhaustion of a woman who had spent 2 years trying to be the perfect wife to a man who demanded perfection as a baseline. As the engine roared to life and the car slipped through the iron gates, my shoulders finally dropped. He was gone. 7 days. A whole week without his critical eyes scanning the baseboards for dust. A week without him correcting my grammar in front of guests. I walked into the living room, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a warm blanket. Our home was a sprawling 5,000-square-foot estate in Buckhead decorated in shades of cream and gold. It looked like a page out of a magazine, beautiful but cold. I headed to the wet bar. It was only noon, but my nerves were frayed. I reached for a bottle of vintage red wine, anticipating the rich taste that would finally settle my racing heart. I poured a glass, watching the crimson liquid swirl. But as I lifted the glass to my lips, I paused. I sniffed. At first I thought the wine had turned, but the smell wasn't coming from the glass. It was coming from the air vents. It started faint, a sulfurous tang that scratched the back of my throat, but within seconds it became an overwhelming stench of rotten eggs. Gas. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the marble floor, red splashing onto the white rug, but I didn't care. I ran toward the kitchen, my heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. The smell was so thick here it made my eyes water. There on the massive chef island, the 6-burner gas stove was hissing like a nest of snakes. All 6 knobs were turned to the highest setting, but there were no flames. Just a steady, invisible stream of poison pumping into our sealed house. My mind raced. Darius had made tea right before he left. He was a man who color-coordinated his closet. He never forgot anything. This was not an accident. He had turned them on, locked the door, and left us to sleep forever. I stood frozen in the center of the kitchen. The fumes were already making me dizzy. My survival instinct screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. I watched the invisible gas distorting the air above the stove, realizing that a single spark from the refrigerator compressor would turn this mansion into a crater. I was about to die in the home I paid for. Then the impossible happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the breakfast nook. I expected to hear the electric whir of a motorized wheelchair. I expected to see the struggling, slow movements of a boy dragging dead weight. Instead, I heard the squeak of sneakers gripping the hardwood floor. Trey launched himself out of his chair. He did not stumble. He did not hesitate. He moved with the explosive speed of a varsity athlete. In one fluid motion, he sprinted across the kitchen. He didn't even go around the massive marble island. He placed one hand on the counter and vaulted over it, clearing the 4-foot height with terrifying ease. I stopped breathing. My brain could not process what my eyes were seeing. This was the boy who needed help using the bathroom. This was the boy whose legs were supposed to be useless dead weight. Yet here he was, moving faster than any 14-year-old I had ever seen. He landed silently on the other side of the island, His hands flew to the knobs. Snap, snap, snap. He twisted them off with practiced precision. The hissing stopped immediately. But he wasn't done. He rushed to the bay windows, throwing the latches and shoving the heavy panes upward. Cold, fresh air rushed in, diluting the sickening sweetness of the gas. The rush of oxygen snapped me out of my trance. The crystal wine glass slipped from my sweating fingers. It hit the floor with a deafening crash, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. The red wine pooled around my feet, like blood soaking into the white grout. The sound made Trey freeze. He turned slowly to face me, his chest heaving from the exertion. I looked down at his legs. For 4 years, I had only seen them covered in blankets or loose sweatpants, looking frail and thin. Now, standing there in his basketball shorts, the truth was undeniable. His calves were defined and muscular. His thighs were thick with strength. There was no atrophy. There was no weakness. These were the legs of a runner, not a cripple. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the gas had been. My stepson stood tall, looking me dead in the eye. The wheelchair sat empty in the corner, a mocking symbol of the lie we had been living. My husband tried to kill me, but his paralyzed son just saved my life. And the son wasn't paralyzed at all. I opened my mouth to ask 1,000 questions, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. The boy standing before me was a stranger wearing my stepson's face. Trey saw the shock in my eyes and raised a trembling finger to his lips. His chest was heaving, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He looked nothing like the vacant child I had spoon-fed oatmeal to just that morning. He took a step closer to me. His voice was not the slurred mumble I was used to hearing. It was clear, it was deep, and it was terrified. Do not scream. Do not cry. If you make a sound, we are both dead. I gripped the edge of the marble counter to keep from collapsing. I needed to understand. I whispered his name, asking why he had been hiding this from me, asking why his father would do this. Trey grabbed my arm. His grip was strong, bruising my skin. He told me to listen carefully because we did not have much time. He said the gas was not an accident. He said Darius knew I had upgraded my life insurance policy last week. The room spun. My knees buckled. I remembered that conversation. Darius had been so sweet that night. He had brought me tea and massaged my shoulders. He told me that with the market being so volatile, we needed to protect our assets. He suggested I increase my coverage to $5 million for tax purposes. He had even filled out the paperwork for me, guiding my hand to sign on the dotted line. He made himself the sole beneficiary. I thought he was being a responsible husband. Trey was telling me he was preparing for a payday. Trey continued, his words coming out in a rush. He told me that Darius thinks he is a vegetable. That is the only reason he is still alive. He hears everything. He hears the phone calls late at night. He hears the plans. Darius turned on the gas because he wanted it to look like a tragic accident. The grieving husband returns to find his wife and disabled son dead from a leak. It was the perfect crime. I looked at the stove, then back at the boy who had just saved me. My husband was a monster. I had been sleeping next to a man who saw me as nothing more than a check to be cashed. Anger began to replace the fear, hot and boiling. But before I could say another word, a sound cut through the tension like a knife. Ding-dong. The doorbell echoed through the silent house. It was loud and demanding. We both froze. Trey's eyes went wide with panic. He hissed that it was her. He said she was here to check if the job was done. I did not have to ask who he meant. I knew. Panic took over Trey's face. In a blur of motion, the athletic young man vanished. He threw himself back into the wheelchair in the corner. His body went limp, his head lolled to the side. His mouth fell open in a practiced mask of vacancy. In 1 second, he transformed back into the invalid boy I knew. He whispered one last command without moving his lips. Open the door. Act normal. If she suspects anything, we die today. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath of the lingering gas fumes, and walked toward the door. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a hammer. I was about to face the devil's accomplice, and my only weapon was a lie. The doorbell rang a third time, long and impatient. It was not the polite ring of a neighbor delivering cookies. It was the demand of someone who expected to find a crime scene. I looked at Trey one last time. He was gone. In his place sat the boy I had known for years. His head rolled listlessly to the left, his jaw hung slack, and his eyes were glazed over, staring at nothing. It was a terrifyingly perfect performance. If I did not know better, I would have called an ambulance myself. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. The smell of gas was fading thanks to the open window, but the metallic tang of sulfur still hung in the air like a ghost. I smoothed down my silk robe, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror to ensure my terror did not show on my face, and walked to the heavy oak door. I unlocked it and pulled it open, just as her hand raised to knock again. Rebecca stood on the porch. She was wearing her white pharmacist coat over a designer dress, holding a plastic food container, like a shield. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, pulling her skin tight and giving her eyes a predatory look. When she saw me standing there alive and breathing, a flicker of genuine confusion crossed her face before she masked it with a saccharine smile. "Jasmine," she exclaimed, her voice pitched too high to be sincere. "I was so worried. Darius called me from the airport. He said you were not answering your phone. He asked me to drop by and check on you and poor Trey. I brought some lasagna." She did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the foyer, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble. She was not here to deliver pasta. She was here to see if the gas had done its job. I closed the door and followed her, my mind racing for a believable lie. "I was in the shower, Rebecca. I did not hear the phone." She stopped in the middle of the hallway. Her nose twitched. She was sniffing the air. The open window in the kitchen had cleared most of the fumes, but a faint trace remained. It was subtle, but to a woman looking for death, it must have been obvious. "It smells strange in here," she said, turning to look at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Like rotten eggs. Do you smell that?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle to my own ears. "Oh, that." I felt terrible about it. I was trying to clean the oven before Darius got back. I used that heavy-duty cleaner and it smells awful. I had to open all the windows just to breathe. I am such a disaster without him. I played the role of the incompetent wife, the role she and Darius expected me to play. Rebecca studied me for a long moment. She was looking for a crack in my armor. She was looking for fear. I gave her nothing but a ditzy smile. She hummed, not quite convinced, and walked straight into the living room where Trey sat. She circled his wheelchair like a shark. She leaned down, her face inches from his, staring into his vacant eyes. She was checking for dilated pupils. She was checking for signs of life. "He looks pale," she muttered, placing a hand on his forehead. Her touch was not gentle. It was clinical. "How has he been today? Has he been acting up?" "He has been sleeping mostly," I lied, stepping between her and the boy. "Just watching his cartoons." Rebecca straightened up and looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the open windows and the fresh breeze blowing through the house. She knew something was wrong. The plan had failed, but she did not know how. She did not know that the vegetable in the wheelchair was watching her every move, waiting for the moment to strike. She handed me the cold lasagna, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Well, since you are safe, I should go. But keep those windows open, Jasmine. You do not want to suffocate in your own home. Accidents happen so easily." The threat hung heavy in the air between us. She knew. I knew. The war had officially begun. She walked past the velvet armchair and stood in the center of the room, tilting her head back as she inhaled deeply. Her nostrils flared slightly, like a hound catching a scent in the wind. The open windows were doing their job, but the heavy, distinct odor of natural gas still clung to the curtains and the upholstery. It was faint, but to a woman who had expected to find a corpse, it was a disappointment. Rebecca turned to me slowly. Her eyes were not warm, they were calculating. She asked me again about the smell. She said that it did not smell like cleaning chemicals. She said it smelled like a leak. She said it smelled like danger. I forced myself to walk over to the sofa and fluff a pillow, trying to keep my hands busy so she would not see them shaking. I knew I had to sell this lie perfectly. If she suspected that I knew about the trap, she would call Darius immediately. They would come up with a plan B before the sun went down. I had to be the ditzy, incompetent wife they all believed I was. I let out a sigh of embarrassment and looked down at my feet. I told her that she was right. I told her it wasn't just the oven cleaner. I told her that I had tried to make that roasted tomato soup Darius loved so much before he left. I said that I must have turned the knob the wrong way or the pilot light went out. I told her I didn't notice until the smell was everywhere. I looked up at her through my eyelashes, playing the part of the distressed damsel. I told her I was so stupid and that I almost panicked. I told her that is why I was in the shower trying to wash the smell off my skin. Rebecca studied my face for a long, agonizing moment. She was looking for a micro-expression, a twitch, anything that would give away the deception. But I had spent 2 years perfecting the art of hiding my feelings from her and Darius. Finally, the tension in her shoulders dropped. She bought it. But more than that, she liked it. It confirmed everything she thought about me. To her, I was just a pretty face, with no brain, a woman who could not even boil soup without almost blowing up the house. She let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. She shook her head and told me that I really should be more careful. She said that Darius worries about me leaving the stove on. She said that a house this big requires a lot of attention to detail, implying that I clearly lacked it. She walked over to the mantel and ran a finger along the wood, checking for dust. She said that maybe it is a good thing she came over. She said that someone needs to make sure the house is still standing while Darius is away. She looked at Trey again, who was still slumped in his chair, drooling slightly. She asked if the gas bothered him. She asked if he coughed. I told her he was fine. I told her I got him near the window immediately. Rebecca nodded, but her eyes were still scanning the room. She was not just looking for gas, she was looking for anything out of place. She walked toward the kitchen, her heels clicking on the floor like a ticking clock. I held my breath. If she went to the stove and saw the knobs, she might see that they were all turned to the off position now, but she might notice something else. I had to get her out of there. I had to get her out of my house before she saw the broken wine glass I had kicked under the cabinet. The sound of Rebecca's Mercedes fading down the driveway was the only thing that allowed my lungs to expand again. I locked the deadbolt, threw the latch, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. The adrenaline was beginning to crash, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in my chest. I pushed myself off the door and walked back into the living room, but I could not look at Trey yet. Instead, my eyes landed on the grand fireplace mantel. Dozens of framed photographs stood there like soldiers in formation. I picked up the largest one. It was taken 2 years ago at the Black Excellence Gala. Darius was in a tuxedo, looking devastatingly handsome, with one hand resting protectively on Trey's shoulder. Trey was in his wheelchair, looking small and fragile. In the photo, I was looking at Darius with eyes full of adoration. I wasn't just looking at a husband. I was looking at a hero. That was the hook. That was how he reeled me in. When I met Darius, I didn't fall for his money or his real estate empire. I fell for the story he spun so effortlessly. He was the grieving widower who refused to institutionalize his paralyzed son. In a society that often unfairly stereotypes Black fathers as absent, Darius was the ultimate counter-narrative. He was the man who stayed. He was the man who sacrificed his social life to change catheters and blend food. I remembered our third date. We were at a high-end restaurant and he had brought Trey along. I watched as Darius cut Trey's steak into tiny, manageable pieces with the patience of a saint. He wiped the corner of his son's mouth without a flicker of annoyance. I remembered the way the other diners looked at him. Women whispered behind their napkins, their eyes soft with sympathy and admiration. Men nodded at him with respect. He wasn't just a man, he was a monument to fatherhood. He told me his wife had died in the crash that took Trey's legs. He told me he lived with the guilt of surviving every single day. He cried on my shoulder, his tears soaking my blouse, telling me how lonely it was to carry such a heavy burden. I held him. I comforted him. I promised him he wouldn't have to carry it alone anymore. I felt chosen. I felt like I was joining a noble cause. I looked at the photo again, my grip tightening until the silver frame dug into my palm. It was all a performance. Every moment of tenderness was rehearsed. Every public display of affection was a marketing strategy. He didn't keep Trey close out of love. He kept him close because a disabled single father is a magnet for sympathy, and sympathy opens checkbooks. He had built his entire reputation, his entire business brand, on the broken back of a child he had broken himself. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. I had shared a bed with a sociopath who used his son as a prop. The church deacons, the business partners, the charity boards, they all saw a saint. But standing in that gas-filled house, I finally saw the sinner. The man I loved did not exist. He was just a character played by a monster, and the curtain had finally fallen. I turned back to Trey. The sound of the car engine had faded completely, leaving us alone in the silence of the large, cold house. He had dropped the act the moment the lock clicked shut. He sat up straight in the wheelchair, wiping the fake drool from his chin with the back of his hand. His eyes were no longer vacant. They were burning with a hatred that seemed too big for a 14-year-old boy to hold. I walked over and knelt beside him. I needed to know the rest. I asked him how long he had been able to walk. I asked him why he let the world believe he was broken. Trey shook his head. He told me that the walking was recent, but the lie started 4 years ago. He told me that everything I knew about the worst night of his life was a fabrication. He asked me what Darius had told me about the crash. I recited the story I had heard 1,000 times. I said that his mother, Vanessa, had been driving home from a party. I said that she had been drinking. I said that she lost control on the highway in the rain, flipping the SUV 3 times. I said that she died on impact and that Darius, the passenger, had been thrown clear but tried desperately to pull Trey from the wreckage. Trey let out a bitter, dry laugh. He looked down at his hands. He told me that was the story for the police. That was the story for the insurance company. That was the story that got Darius a $2 million payout for wrongful death and another $1 million from her life insurance. Then he looked at me, and his voice dropped to a whisper that made my blood freeze. Mom did not drink Jasmine. She hated the taste of alcohol. She was the designated driver that night. But she wasn't driving. My breath hitched. Trey continued. He said Darius was driving. He said Darius was drunk and furious because a business deal had fallen through. He was screaming at Vanessa, hitting the steering wheel. He was driving 90 miles an hour on wet asphalt. Vanessa begged him to slow down. She begged him to think of their son in the back seat. Darius just laughed and slammed on the gas. When the car flipped, the world went black for a moment. When Trey woke up, he was hanging upside down in his seatbelt. He saw his mother. Her neck was broken. She was gone. And he saw his father. Darius was unhurt. He was crawling out of the shattered window. Trey thought his father was coming to save him, but Darius did not reach for his son. He reached for his dead wife. Trey watched through the smoke and the rain as Darius unbuckled Vanessa's body. He watched his father drag the woman he claimed to love across the console. He watched him shove her lifeless body behind the steering wheel and buckle her in. Then Darius climbed into the passenger seat, rubbed his own blood onto his face to look injured, and waited for the sirens. Trey told me that when the paramedics arrived, Darius leaned back toward him. He didn't ask if Trey was okay. He whispered a promise. He said that if Trey told anyone who was really driving, he would finish the job the crash started. He said no one would believe a confused, traumatized child over a grieving, wealthy businessman. I covered my mouth with my hand, tears streaming down my face. I had married a man who framed his dead wife for her own murder. But Trey wasn't done. He said the legs were next. The crash hurt his spine, yes, but the doctor said he would walk again in 6 months with therapy. Darius made sure that never happened. My hands were shaking so hard I had to clasp them together in my lap. I looked at Trey's legs, the legs I had massaged with expensive oils, the legs I had lifted in and out of the bath for 2 years. I asked him the question that was burning a hole in my stomach. I asked him if the doctors knew. I asked him if his paralysis was ever real. Trey looked at the empty wheelchair with pure disgust. He told me that in the beginning, it was real. The swelling from the crash had compressed his spinal cord. For the first year, he could not feel anything below his waist. But then the swelling went down. The nerves began to reconnect. The doctors told Darius that with intensive physical therapy, Trey would likely walk again by his 12th birthday. But Darius did not hire a physical therapist. He fired the ones the hospital recommended. He told everyone that the trauma was too much for Trey, that he needed rest. Trey told me that 2 years ago he started feeling the pins and needles in his toes. Then he could wiggle them. Then he could bend his knees. One afternoon, while Darius was at a board meeting, Trey pulled himself up using the bathroom sink. He stood. He took a step. He fell, but he got back up. He was so excited. He thought his father would be happy. He thought the nightmare was over. He was wrong. Darius came home early that day. He found Trey standing in the middle of the hallway, holding onto the wall, sweating, but smiling. Darius did not cry tears of joy. He did not rush to hug his son. He dropped his briefcase and stared at Trey with cold, dead eyes. He walked over to him, kicked his legs out from under him, and watched him hit the floor hard. Trey told me that Darius knelt over him and whispered the truth. He said that a crippled son is a tragedy that opens wallets, but a healed son is just another mouth to feed. He explained the math. The state provided a monthly disability check that covered the mortgage. The insurance settlement paid for the cars. But the real money came from the Trey Foundation. I felt sick. The Trey Foundation was Darius's pride and joy. He hosted galas 4 times a year. He showed videos of Trey looking sad and helpless. He collected millions of dollars from wealthy donors who wanted to feel like heroes. Trey told me that Darius gave him a choice that night. He could stay in the wheelchair, play the part of the broken boy, and live in this mansion with video games and good food. Or if he ever stood up again, Darius would have him declared mentally unstable and committed to a state-run facility for the criminally insane. He described the facility to Trey in vivid detail. He talked about the rats, the beatings, and the solitude. So Trey sat down. He became a professional victim. He learned to drag his legs even when they wanted to run. He learned to let his father lift him onto stages at charity events while cameras flashed. He became a prisoner in his own body, locked in a cage made of chrome and leather, all so his father could drive a Porsche and wear Italian suits. The wheelchair was not a medical device. It was an ATM machine. And I had been helping Darius make withdrawals every single day without even knowing it. I felt the room spinning again. I grabbed the edge of the coffee table to steady myself. The level of calculation involved was sickening, but there was still a piece of the puzzle missing. I asked him about the doctors. I asked him how a medical professional could examine a healthy boy and declare him paraplegic. Surely they would test his reflexes. Surely they would see the muscle tone returning. Trey pulled up his pant leg. He pointed to a small bruised cluster of needle marks on his upper thigh. He told me about the nightly ritual. Every single evening at 8 o'clock, Darius would come into his room with a silver tray. On it was a syringe and a small glass vial with a blue label. Darius told me and everyone else that it was a specialized vitamin compound imported from Europe. He said it was an experimental treatment to keep Trey's nerves from withering away completely. I remembered watching this ritual 100 times. I remembered smiling at Darius, thinking he was such a dedicated father, sparing no expense for his son's health. I even held the rubbing alcohol swab for him sometimes. I was sick to my stomach. I had helped him do it. Trey looked at me with eyes that had seen too much darkness. He told me it wasn't vitamins. It was a high-dose muscle relaxant mixed with a sedative. He said he didn't know the name of the drug, but he knew what it did. He described the feeling. 10 minutes after the injection, a cold wave would start at his toes. It would creep up his ankles, then his calves, then his thighs. It felt like his legs were being filled with concrete. The strength he had secretly built up during the day would vanish. His muscles would go slack. His nerves would stop firing. For the next 12 hours, he was truly paralyzed. He would lie in bed trying to move a toe, trying to flex a foot, but nothing would happen. He was trapped in his own body. Darius timed the doses perfectly. Whenever there was a doctor's appointment or an insurance evaluation, Darius would double the dose the night before. By the time Trey was lifted onto the examination table, his legs were dead weight. The doctors would tap his knees with their rubber hammers, and nothing would move. They would prick his skin with needles, and Trey, drugged out of his mind, would barely feel it. The doctors saw what they expected to see. They saw a tragic, broken boy. They wrote their reports. Condition unchanged. Prognosis poor. Permanent disability confirmed. And with every signature on those medical forms, the checks kept coming. The Trey Foundation kept receiving donations. Trey told me the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the fear that one night the feeling wouldn't come back. He lived in constant terror that Darius would accidentally give him too much and stop his heart, or that the drugs would permanently damage the nerves he had worked so hard to heal. I stood up and walked to the window, gasping for air. My husband was not just a fraud. He was systematically poisoning his own child every night to keep him compliant. He was chemically binding his son to a wheelchair for profit. I remembered the way Darius would kiss Trey on the forehead after giving him the shot. "Good boy," he would say. "This will make you strong." It was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't healing his son, he was harvesting him. And I knew exactly where those blue vials came from. I knew who signed the prescriptions. It wasn't a doctor in Europe. It was the woman who had just left my house with a casserole dish. The tears finally broke through the dam of my shock. I collapsed onto the velvet sofa, burying my face in my hands, as deep, racking sobs tore through my chest. The guilt was a physical weight crushing my lungs. I reached out blindly and grabbed Trey's hand, squeezing it until my knuckles turned white. I begged him to forgive me. I told him I was so sorry. I told him I was the adult, the one who was supposed to protect him. Yet I had been blindly serving his tormentor tea and smiling for family photos while he lived in a nightmare. Trey did not pull away. For the first time in 2 years, the boy who usually flinched at my touch squeezed my hand back. His grip was firm, grounding me. He looked at me with a maturity that did not belong on a 14-year-old face. He told me to stop. He said it was not my fault. He said Darius is a master manipulator who fooled doctors, judges, and the entire city of Atlanta. Of course he fooled me. I was just another piece on his chessboard. I wiped my swollen eyes with the back of my hand, smearing mascara across my cheek. I took a ragged breath and looked at the smartphone sitting on the coffee table. The screen was dark, but it held the power to end this. I told Trey we had to call the police right now. I said we needed to report the gas leak, the drugs, the insurance fraud, everything. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling with rage. Trey's hand shot out and clamped over my wrist. His grip was iron. He shook his head violently. "No police. Not yet." I stared at him confused. I asked him why. I said his father just tried to murder us. Trey leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. He explained the cold reality of our situation. He asked me what the police would see if they walked in right now. They would see a hysterical woman and a disabled boy in a pristine mansion. The gas was gone. The smell was fading. Darius would spin it. He would say I left the stove on because I was stressed or drinking. He would paint me as unstable. As for the paralysis, Darius had 4 years of medical records from top specialists confirming his condition. If Trey stood up and walked for the police, Darius would claim it was a medical miracle. Or worse, he would claim Trey had been faking it to manipulate him. Trey looked deep into my eyes. He said, Darius has lawyers on retainer who cost more than this house. He has judges at his dinner parties. If we strike now and Miss Darius will win, he will have me committed or arrested, and he will send Trey to that institution he threatened him with. We cannot just wound a man like Darius. We have to bury him. I slowly pulled my hand back from the phone. My stepson was right. He had spent 4 years analyzing his enemy from that wheelchair. He knew Darius better than anyone. To take down a predator who thrived on plausible deniability, we didn't need a 911 call. We needed a bulletproof case. I sat up straighter, the fog of grief clearing to reveal a cold, sharp resolve. The forensic accountant in me finally woke up. I told Trey that Darius made one fatal mistake. He forgot who I was. He thought I was just a trophy wife who looked good on his arm. He forgot that I made a living hunting down hidden assets and exposing corporate fraud for Fortune 500 companies. I looked at Trey and made him a promise. I told him that if Darius loved money more than his own flesh and blood, then I would use that money to hang him. I would find every shell company, every illegal transfer, and every forged signature. I would build a case so tight that no lawyer in Georgia could get him out of it. We made a pact in the dim light of the living room. I would be the hunter. Trey would be the spy. He would continue to play the part of the helpless invalid, taking the fake injections and dragging his legs. It was a dangerous alliance. One slip up, one whisper, and we were dead. But as I looked at the fierce determination in my stepson's eyes, I knew we had a chance. We were no longer victims, we were partners. I waited until the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 in the morning. The house was silent as a tomb. Trey was asleep in his room, or at least pretending to be. I made my way to Darius's home office on the ground floor. This was his sanctuary. He always told me never to touch his computer because he dealt with sensitive client data. He said it was for my own legal protection. I used to believe him. Now I knew it was to protect himself from me. I sat down in his heavy leather chair. It smelled like his cologne, a scent that used to make me feel safe, but now made my skin crawl. I woke up his iMac. The login screen stared back at me. Darius was arrogant, and arrogant men make simple mistakes. He wouldn't use a random string of characters. He would use something that made him feel important. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried our wedding anniversary. Incorrect. Then I typed in the date of the car accident. The date he became the heroic single father. The screen unlocked instantly. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was my domain. I was not just a housewife looking through browser history. I was a senior forensic accountant who had brought down Ponzi schemes twice this size. I knew exactly where to look. I ignored the personal checking accounts. Those were the decoys. I went straight into the digital ledgers for the Trey Foundation. On the surface, everything looked pristine. Donations came in from charity galas, and expenses went out for medical research and rehabilitation equipment. But numbers have a rhythm, and when you steal, you break that rhythm. I exported the raw data into a spreadsheet and ran a pivot table. There it was, a heartbeat of corruption. Every month on the 15th, a transfer was made. It was always just under $10,000 to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements. But there were dozens of them. Over 4 years, it added up to millions. The recipient was a company I had never heard of called Blue Horizon Ventures. I pulled up the corporate registry. Blue Horizon was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. It had no employees, it had no website, it had no office, just a mailbox address in Georgetown. I traced the wire transfers. The money wasn't being used for equipment. It was sitting in an offshore account accumulating interest. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating my face. This was not just greed. This was theft from people who thought they were helping a disabled child. Darius was stripping the foundation bare. He was using his son's tragedy to build a golden parachute for himself. And based on the frequency of the recent transfers, he was accelerating the process. He was cashing out. The Blue Horizon was not an investment. It was his getaway car. The digital trail was damning, but I needed something physical, something a jury could hold in their hands. I turned my swivel chair toward the large oil painting of the Atlanta skyline that dominated the wall behind the desk. It was a cliché, something out of a bad movie, but Darius loved clichés. He thought they were sophisticated. I gripped the heavy gold frame and swung it away from the wall. There, nestled in the drywall, was a reinforced steel safe. My heart hammered against my ribs. A safe is only useful if you can open it. I stared at the digital keypad, the numbers glowing faint red in the dark room. I knew it would not be the same code as his computer. That would be too easy. I tried the date of his first $1 million deal. Nothing. I tried the street address of his childhood home. Error. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, trying to think like him. Darius was a narcissist, but he had a soft spot for one person, the only person he ever claimed to respect: his late mother. He visited her grave every month. He kept her picture in his wallet. I typed in 0824, August 24th, her birthday. The mechanism let out a mechanical whir followed by a satisfying click. The heavy steel door popped open just an inch. I pulled it wide, the hinges silent. Inside, illuminated by the dim light of the computer screen, were stacks of $100 bills banded together. There must have been $50,000 in cash. But I pushed the money aside. I was not looking for petty cash. I was looking for the exit plan. At the back of the safe lay a thick leather envelope. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. I undid the clasp and dumped the contents onto the desk. 2 passports slid out. I picked up the first one. It was a United States passport, brand new. I flipped it open. The photo was Darius. He wasn't smiling, but the name next to the photo did not say Darius. It read Marcus Sterling. I picked up the second passport. I expected it to be blank, or maybe for a business partner. I flipped it open and felt the bile rise in my throat. The photo was Rebecca. She was wearing a brunette wig and glasses, but that smirk was unmistakable. The name read Elena Sterling. They weren't just running away, they were starting over. As a married couple. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out 2 airline ticket jackets. I opened them. First class. One way. Atlanta to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The departure date was for Sunday night. That was 2 days from now. The timeline snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. The gas leak was supposed to kill me and Trey today. Tomorrow would be the grieving period. Saturday night was the gala where they would collect the final millions in donations for the tragic loss. And Sunday, while the police were still sifting through the ashes of my home, Marcus and Elena Sterling would board a plane to South America, disappearing forever with my money and my husband's freedom. I stared at the tickets. They had planned everything down to the hour. I was not a wife to him. I was not even a person. I was just a loose end to be tied up before the flight. I took out my phone and photographed every page of the passports and the tickets. I put everything back exactly as I found it, wiped the keypad with my sleeve and closed the safe. He thought he was flying to freedom in 48 hours. I was going to make sure the only place he went was a federal prison cell. The 2 passports and the one-way tickets to Brazil were enough to send Darius to prison for flight risk and fraud. But my gut told me there was something more visceral binding these two together. Greed is a powerful motivator, but it usually isn't enough to make a woman help a man paralyze his own son. There had to be an emotional anchor. I reached back into the depths of the safe. My fingers brushed against something small and cold, tucked into the velvet lining at the very back. It was a silver USB drive, heavy and expensive looking. I pulled it out and plugged it into the side of the iMac. A folder popped up on the screen simply labeled Us. I double-clicked it, the screen filled with hundreds of thumbnails. I opened the first one and immediately had to cover my mouth to stifle a gasp. It was a photo of Darius and Rebecca. They were not standing side by side like in-laws at a family barbecue. They were in a bed tangled in white sheets, asleep in each other's arms. I clicked the next one. Darius kissing Rebecca's neck on a balcony overlooking a tropical beach. The next one. Rebecca wearing nothing but Darius's dress shirt, laughing as she held a glass of champagne. These were not just affair photos, these were trophies. They documented a passionate, consuming relationship that had clearly been going on for years. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the gas leak. Rebecca was the widow of Darius's older brother, Julian. Julian had died of a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. He was a good man, a kind man, who had welcomed Darius into his home when he was struggling. I right-clicked on one of the beach photos and selected Get Info to check the metadata. The date stared back at me like an accusation. June 12th, 6 years ago. My blood ran cold. That date was a full year before Julian died. That date was 2 years before Vanessa Trey's mother was killed in the car crash. I frantically checked the other photos. There were dozens of them dated while both of their spouses were still alive. They had been sleeping together for years, right under everyone's noses. I saw pictures of them at family Christmas parties, stealing glances at each other while holding hands with their respective partners. I saw a video clip of them in a car mocking Julian's weight and Vanessa's naivety. This was not just adultery. This was a long con. They had been partners in everything. They had likely planned the removal of their spouses just as methodically as they were planning their escape to Brazil. Julian's heart attack, Vanessa's car crash, and now the gas leak for me and Trey. We were all just obstacles in the way of their twisted love story. I looked at Rebecca's face in the photos. She looked at Darius with a level of devotion that bordered on worship. That explained everything. It explained why a pharmacist would risk her license to provide illegal drugs. It explained why she would help abuse a child. She wasn't just an accomplice, she was a fanatic. She would burn the world down if Darius asked her to, because in her mind they were the star-crossed lovers, and the rest of us were just collateral damage. I quickly dragged the entire folder onto my own encrypted hard drive. I had the money trail. I had the flight plan. And now I had the motive. I ejected the USB drive and put it back in the safe exactly where I found it. I was about to close the safe door when the phone on the desk lit up. It was not a call. It was a notification from the smart home system. Motion detected in the master bedroom. My heart stopped. Darius was in Miami. Trey was downstairs. Who was walking in my bedroom? I froze, staring at the screen as the camera feed loaded. The phone vibrated in my hand like a living thing, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up with the caller ID. Hubby. The face of the man who had murdered his wife and was currently plotting to kill me stared out from the contact photo. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could not let him see me panic. I could not let him see the hatred that was currently boiling in my blood. I had to become the actress of a lifetime. I sprinted up the stairs to the master bedroom, taking deep breaths to steady my shaking hands. I threw myself onto the bed, propping pillows behind me to create a casual, relaxed tableau. I pinched my cheeks to bring some color back into my pale face, and forced my lips into a smile that felt like it was made of glass. I swiped accept. Darius filled the screen. He was sitting in his hotel room in Miami, wearing a crisp white dress shirt with the top button undone. He looked relaxed, holding a glass of amber liquid, likely expensive scotch. But his eyes were not relaxed. They were sharp, darting around the frame of my video feed before finally settling on my face. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You took a long time to answer. Were you busy?" I laughed, a light, airy sound that made me want to vomit. "I was just in the bathroom, baby," I lied, angling the phone so he could see the empty, pristine bedroom behind me. "I miss you. The house feels so big without you." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scrutinized the background. He was looking for signs of chaos. He was looking for firefighters, police officers, or open windows. He was looking for the aftermath of an explosion. "Rebecca told me she stopped by," he said casually, though I knew it was a test. "She said there was a weird smell in the house." "Is everything okay?" I rolled my eyes playfully. "Oh, that. I felt so silly." I tried to make your favorite roasted tomato soup and I completely forgot about it on the stove. It boiled over and made a huge mess. I had to air the place out for hours. I am hopeless in the kitchen without you, Darius. You know that. His shoulders visibly relaxed. The lie worked. It fit his narrative of me perfectly. The helpless, dependent wife who needed him to survive. He smiled a smug, satisfied expression that made my skin crawl. Well, be careful, Jasmine. I would hate for anything to happen to my prized possession. How is Trey? Is he behaving? The question hung in the air, heavy with double meaning. He was asking if the drugs were working. He was asking if the boy was still a vegetable. He is sleeping like a baby, I said, keeping my voice steady. I checked on him 10 minutes ago. He has not moved an inch all day. Good, Darius said. Make sure he gets his vitamins tonight. We need him strong for the gala on Saturday. I am coming home early, Jasmine. I will be there tomorrow evening. I have a surprise for you. A surprise? The word sounded like a threat. I cannot wait, I cooed. The screen went black as he ended the call. I dropped the phone onto the duvet as if it were burning hot. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. He was coming back. The timeline had just shattered. I did not have a week. I had less than 24 hours to finish this investigation and set the trap before the killer walked back through the front door. The photos of the affair were damaging, but a good lawyer could argue they were taken out of context. To bury Darius, I needed his soul on display. I needed the jury to hear the venom he spit when the cameras were not rolling. I remembered his car. Darius drove a Porsche Panamera, a vehicle he worshipped more than God. He was obsessed with its tech features, specifically the cloud integration that synced his GPS history, and crucially his voice memos. He used the car's dictation system constantly to record ideas for his real estate schemes while driving. I logged into the manufacturer's portal using the same password that had opened his safe. The interface loaded, displaying a map of his recent trips and a folder labeled voice logs. My finger hovered over a file dated 2 days ago, right before he left for the airport. I pressed play. Static filled the quiet bedroom, followed by the roar of an engine accelerating. Then Darius's voice cut through, crystal clear and dripping with agitation. He was not talking to anyone. He was venting to himself a habit he had when the mask of sanity became too heavy to wear. I cannot believe I have to drag that drooling little burden to another gala, his voice sneered from the speaker. 2 hours of smiling and patting his head. He smells like failure. I flinched as if he had slapped me. But the recording continued. Rebecca says we need to up the dosage. The kid is getting too alert. I saw him tracking me with his eyes yesterday. If that little cripple wakes up and ruins this payout, I swear to God I will finish what the car crash started. He is not a son. He is an ATM with wheels. And I'm about to cash out. The audio ended with the sound of him pounding the steering wheel. I sat in stunned silence. There it was, the undeniable recorded confession of his hatred. He did not just see Trey as a tool, he saw him as an object of disgust. He called his own flesh and blood an ATM with wheels. The cruelty was so casual, so ingrained, it made the blood drain from my face. I replayed the clip, forcing myself to listen to it again. I needed to memorize the cadence of his hate. I needed to let it burn away any lingering hesitation I had about destroying him. I saved the file to 3 different cloud servers and a physical drive. This was not just evidence of fraud or abuse. This was evidence of a soul so black it would make a jury gasp. The timestamp showed he recorded it while driving to the airport to leave us to die. He was planning our murder and complaining about the inconvenience of his victim in the same breath. I closed the iPad. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. I had his voice. Now I needed a witness who had seen the bruises before the world looked away. The sun was barely rising when I pulled into the driveway of a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Atlanta. I had spent the last 3 hours digging through archived school board records until I found her name. Sarah Miller. She was Trey's homeroom teacher 3 years ago, the only one who had ever raised a red flag. According to the files, she was fired for unprofessional conduct and creating a hostile learning environment. I knew that was code for Darius threatening to sue the district into oblivion. I knocked on the door, my hands trembling slightly in the pockets of my trench coat. A woman in her mid-40s opened it. Her eyes were tired, but they sharpened instantly when she saw me. She recognized me. I was the wife of the man who ruined her career. Mrs. Sterling, she said, her voice cold and guarded. If you are here to threaten me again, I have nothing left for you to take. I shook my head quickly. I told her I was not there to threaten her. I told her I was there because I finally believed her. Her expression shifted from hostility to shock. She let me in. Her living room was small but cluttered with books and teaching materials. She made tea, her hands shaking just as much as mine. We sat down and I asked her what she saw. Sarah took a deep breath as if releasing a weight she had carried for years. She told me that Trey was the brightest student she ever had. But he was also the most terrified. She noticed the bruises first, small ones on his arms consistent with being grabbed too hard. But it was his behavior that scared her. Whenever his father came to pick him up, Trey would go mute. He would tremble. One day Sarah kept him after class. She asked him if he was safe at home. Trey started to cry. He whispered that his legs hurt, even though he couldn't feel them. He said his dad gave him bad medicine. Sarah reported it to the principal immediately. The next day, Darius stormed into the school with 2 lawyers. He produced medical records stating Trey had a rare skin condition that caused easy bruising. He claimed Sarah was discriminating against a disabled father. Within a week, she was fired. She was blacklisted from teaching in the entire state. I reached into my bag and pulled out the voice recorder I had synced from the car. I played the clip of Darius calling Trey an ATM with wheels. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. I knew it, she whispered. I knew he was a monster. I asked her if she would be willing to testify. I told her I was building a case to put him away for good, but I needed someone to corroborate the history of abuse. I needed someone to show the jury that this wasn't just a recent plot, but a years-long campaign of torture. Sarah looked at the recorder, then at me. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a fierce determination. She told me she had kept a journal. She had documented every bruise, every comment, every strange incident from that year. She had kept it hidden in her attic, hoping that one day someone would ask. I will testify, she said. I will tell the world what he did to that little boy. I drove away with the journal in my passenger seat. I had the money, the motive, the confession, and now the witness. The noose was tightening. I drove straight from the teacher's house to the biolabs at Emory University. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. In my purse, wrapped in a tissue, was the small blue vial I had managed to swipe from Darius's supply kit 2 days ago. He thought I was oblivious, just a trophy wife who didn't ask questions. That arrogance was about to be his undoing. I pulled into the loading dock where my old college roommate Lisa was waiting. Lisa was now a senior toxicologist. I had called her on the way telling her it was a life-or-death emergency. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the back door and ushered me into the sterile, fluorescent world of the laboratory. I handed her the vial. She held it up to the light, frowning at the unmarked label. I told her that my husband had been injecting this into his son every night for 4 years. I told her he claimed it was a European vitamin compound to help with muscle density. Lisa withdrew a small sample with a pipette and placed it into the mass spectrometer. The machine hummed to life, a low vibration that felt like it was rattling my bones. The minutes stretched into hours. I paced the small room, the smell of rubbing alcohol and chemicals making me nauseous. I kept checking my phone, terrified that Darius would call, or worse, that he was already home. Finally, the printer spat out a graph. Lisa picked it up. Her face went pale. She didn't look at me immediately. She looked at the paper, then back at the vial, then at me with an expression of pure horror. Jasmine, she said, her voice shaking. You need to tell me exactly how much of this the boy is being given. I told her. 5 milligrams, every single night. double the dose before doctor visits. Lisa slammed the paper down on the counter. She told me that if I had not stolen this, that boy would be dead within a year. She pointed to the chemical breakdown. This was not a vitamin. It wasn't even human medication. It was a potent neuromuscular blocking agent derived from a drug used to sedate horses and cattle before surgery. I felt the room tilt. Horses. He was treating his son like livestock. Lisa explained how it worked. The drug blocks the signals between the nerves and the muscles. It creates a state of flaccid paralysis. The subject remains conscious. They can see and hear everything, but they cannot move a single voluntary muscle. It traps them in their own body. But the dosage Darius was using was calculated for an animal weighing 2,000 pounds. Giving this to a 14-year-old boy was playing Russian roulette. She continued, her voice rising in anger. She said the side effects include respiratory failure and permanent nerve degradation. The reason Trey's legs were weak wasn't because of the car accident. It was because this poison was slowly eating away at his nervous system. Darius wasn't just keeping him paralyzed for the money, he was slowly killing him. I took the toxicology report from her hand. It was heavy, undeniable proof. This was not just fraud. This was attempted murder with a biological weapon. I thanked Lisa and walked back to my car. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I had the weapon. I had the motive. I had the witness. And now I had the poison. I was ready to go home. I was ready to welcome my husband back with a smile, knowing that I held the keys to his destruction in my hand. But first, I had to get back before Rebecca returned. I checked my watch. I had 2 hours before the devil came home. I raced back into the house, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a war drum. I had the toxicology report in one hand and Sarah's journal in the other. I needed to hide these documents in the safe before I did anything else. I dumped the contents of my bag onto the dining room table, spreading out the photos of the affair, the fake passports, and the lethal chemical analysis. It looked like the war room of a detective, a collage of betrayal that proved my entire life was a lie. Then the sound of tires crunching on gravel froze the blood in my veins. I stopped breathing. I knew the sound of Darius's Porsche engine, and this was not it. This engine was smoother, quieter. I crept to the window and peered through the sheer curtains. My stomach dropped. It was the silver Mercedes. Rebecca was back. I looked at the table. It was covered in evidence that would send her to prison for life. If she walked in and saw this, she would not call the police. She would call Darius, and they would kill me right here on the expensive Persian rug. The front door lock clicked. She had a key. Of course she had a key. I moved with a speed born of pure terror. I swept the papers into a pile, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the toxicology report. I shoved everything back into my large leather tote bag. One photo of Darius and Rebecca on the beach fluttered to the floor and slid under the heavy oak sideboard. The front door opened. Jasmine Rebecca's voice echoed in the foyer. It was sharp, suspicious. I could not reach the photo without being seen. I could not run up the stairs to the safe without being heard. I had seconds. I grabbed my bag and threw myself behind the kitchen island, curling into a ball just as her heels clicked onto the hardwood floor. I pressed my hand over my mouth, terrified that the sound of my own gasping breath would give me away. "Jasmine, are you here? I forgot my sunglasses." She walked into the dining room. I squeezed my eyes shut. If she looked under the sideboard, if she saw that one glossy photo of her and Darius in a lover's embrace, it was over. I heard her footsteps pause. She was standing right next to the table where the evidence had been seconds ago. Silence. The kind of silence that screams. Then I heard the scrape of wood on wood. She was pulling out a chair. Was she sitting down? Was she waiting for me? Finally, she muttered something under her breath. "Damn it, where are they?" She walked past the dining room and into the kitchen. I saw her shadow stretch across the floor, inching closer to where I was crouched. She was 3 feet away. If she walked around the island to check the refrigerator, she would trip over me. I tensed my muscles, preparing to fight. I looked around for a weapon. A knife block was on the counter above me, out of reach. A heavy cast-iron skillet was on the drying rack. Her heels stopped. She was standing right on the other side of the island. I could smell her expensive perfume, a scent that now smelled like death to me. "Found them," she whispered. She had found her sunglasses on the counter. Her phone began to ring. She answered it immediately, her voice shifting into a low, intimate tone. "I have them, Darius. I am leaving now." "No, she is not here. Probably out spending your money. Don't worry. Tomorrow fixes everything." She turned on her heel and walked out. The front door slammed shut. I stayed on the floor for a full 5 minutes, shaking violently, listening to the silence of the house, realizing just how close I had come to the end. I waited 10 minutes after Rebecca's car disappeared down the street before I dared to move. My muscles were cramped from crouching behind the island, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. The fear that had paralyzed me was gone, burned away by the cold reality of their plan. They were going to kill me tomorrow. That meant I had less than 24 hours to turn this house from a murder scene into a courtroom. I grabbed my keys and drove to a tactical surveillance shop in Midtown, a place I knew from a fraud case I worked on 3 years ago. I did not want to order online. I could not risk a delivery truck showing up while Darius was home. I needed the equipment in my hands right now. The clerk was a retired cop who asked no questions as I piled items onto the counter. I bought 3 high-definition pinhole cameras, 2 audio bugs, and a signal jammer. Back at the house, I moved with the precision of a bomb disposal technician. I started in the living room, the stage where Darius loved to perform his role of the grieving father. I took a plush teddy bear that had been sitting on the bookshelf for years, a gift from a charity drive. I carefully made a small incision in the seam of its button eye and inserted the first camera lens. It was undetectable. I placed the bear back on the shelf, angling it perfectly to capture the entire seating area and the fireplace. Anyone sitting on that sofa would be recorded in 4K resolution. Next, I moved to the foyer. I replaced the decorative vase on the entry table with a nearly identical one I had bought, but this one had a motion-activated camera built into the ceramic pattern. It would catch everyone coming and going. It would prove who was in the house and when. The most important location was Darius's office. This was the heart of the beast. I could not use a bear or a vase here. Darius was too observant. I pulled out the last device, a functional USB wall charger. It looked exactly like the one he used for his phone, but the small black dot above the USB port was a microphone and wide-angle lens. I plugged it into the outlet directly facing his desk and the hidden safe. It would capture every keystroke, every phone call, and every time he opened that wall panel. I sat on the floor of the guest bedroom, which I had turned into my command center, and opened the secure app on my burner phone. One by one, the feeds flickered to life. Screen 1 showed the living room silent and waiting. Screen 2 showed the foyer. Screen 3 showed the office, the leather chair looking menacing in the dim light. My house was no longer a home. It was a trap. Every word he said, every lie he told, every threat he whispered to Trey would be captured and uploaded instantly to a cloud server he could not touch. I watched the screens, mesmerizing in their clarity. I was no longer just the victim. I was the director of this show, and Darius was about to give the performance of a lifetime without even knowing the cameras were rolling. I checked the time. It was late afternoon. The stage was set. Now I just had to wait for the villain to make his entrance. I stared at the monitor, mesmerized by the grainy black and white image of the empty office. The trap was set. The audio bugs were live. The cameras were recording. For the first time since I smelled the gas, I felt a flicker of triumph. I had built a surveillance net that would catch every lie he uttered. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to imagine the look on his face when the police played back his own words in a courtroom. Then my phone buzzed on the floor beside me. It was a short, sharp vibration that sounded like a warning shot. I picked it up. The screen displayed a text message from Darius. The preview showed only the first few words, but they were enough to make my stomach drop. Change of plans. Landing at 5 p.m. tomorrow. I unlocked the phone with trembling fingers to read the rest. Emergency gala organized for tomorrow night at the Ritz. Big donors flying in. They want to see the cause they are supporting. Have the boy washed and ready. Wear the red dress. We need to put on a show. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the hardwood. Tomorrow. He was coming back tomorrow. My carefully constructed timeline shattered. I thought I had until Sunday. I thought I had days to copy files to coach Sarah for her testimony to let the cameras capture incriminating footage. But Darius was accelerating the endgame. An emergency gala meant he needed a massive infusion of cash immediately. He was not waiting for the slow trickle of donations. He was going for one last massive score before he boarded that plane to Brazil. The sudden change terrified me. Had Rebecca told him something? Did she mention the way I looked at her? Or was he just greedy, sensing that the walls were closing in and wanting to grab every last cent before the house burned down? I scrambled to my feet and ran to Trey's room. I did not knock. I burst in breathless and pale. Trey was on the floor doing sit-ups. He froze mid-motion, his eyes locking onto mine. He saw the terror on my face and knew instantly that the ground had shifted beneath us. "He is coming back," I whispered, my voice sounding hollow. "Tomorrow afternoon. He wants you ready for a gala tomorrow night." Trey slowly sat up. His face hardened. He knew what the gala meant. It meant the final performance. It meant Darius would parade him around like a show pony collecting checks while planning to kill him hours later. "That means the flight is moved up," Trey said, his voice deadly calm. "If he is doing the gala tomorrow, he leaves tomorrow night, or Sunday morning at the latest. He is cashing out Jasmine." I nodded, pacing the small room. We were out of time. We could not wait for him to slip up. We could not wait for him to confess on tape. We had to force his hand. We had to walk into that gala, into the lion's den, and execute our plan in front of 500 witnesses. Trey pulled himself back into his wheelchair. He gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned white. "Let him come," he said. "I am ready." I looked at the boy who had become my partner in this war. He was right. There was no turning back now. The cameras were rolling, the stage was set, and tomorrow night the curtain would rise on the final act of Darius Sterling's life. I just prayed we would survive the encore. The sound of the Porsche engine cutting off outside was the loudest noise I had ever heard. It signaled the end of the preparation phase and the beginning of the war. I stood by the foyer window watching Darius step out of the car. He adjusted his cufflinks, grabbed his leather weekender bag, and walked toward the front door with the confident stride of a man who owned the world. I took one last deep breath, centering myself. The woman who opened that door could not be the forensic accountant who had just uncovered a murder plot. She had to be the naive, adoring wife he expected to find. He opened the door before I could reach it. The air in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Darius did not smile. He stood in the threshold, his eyes scanning the space behind me, checking the corners, checking the shadows. It was the instinct of a predator entering a clearing, making sure there were no hunters waiting in the brush. "Hello, my love," I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. His skin was cold. He kissed me back, but I felt his body remain rigid. His eyes remained open, staring over my shoulder. He pulled away and took a deep breath, inhaling the air of the house. "It smells like bleach," he said, his voice void of warmth. I kept my smile plastered on. "I told you I had to scrub everything after the soup disaster. I wanted it perfect for you." He hummed a low sound of acknowledgement, dropping his keys in the bowl. The hidden camera in the floral vase recorded his face perfectly. I saw his eyes dart toward the living room where Trey was sitting. Darius walked past me without another word. He moved through the living room, running a finger along the mantel, checking for dust, or perhaps checking for things that had been moved. He stopped in front of the bookshelf. My heart slammed against my ribs. The teddy bear with the camera in its eye was sitting right there staring at him. Darius reached out. He straightened a book that was slightly askew next to the bear. He did not touch the toy. I exhaled a breath I did not know I was holding. He approached Trey next. My stepson was slumped in his chair, head lolling to the side, a thin line of saliva at the corner of his mouth. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. Darius looked down at him with a mixture of contempt and ownership. He placed a heavy hand on Trey's shoulder, squeezing hard. It was not a comforting touch. It was a test. He was checking the boy's muscle tone. Trey did not flinch. Good, Darius muttered mostly to himself. He looks relaxed. Then he turned toward the hallway that led to his office. I need to check some emails, he said. I followed him, terrified that he would notice the new wall charger that was recording his every move. He walked into the office and stood in the center of the room. He did not sit down. He slowly turned in a circle, looking at the desk, the curtains, and the painting that hid the safe. He stared at the painting for a long, agonizing second. He sensed something. The air in the room was charged with the electricity of my intrusion, even though I had put everything back. He turned to me slowly, his eyes narrowing. You look tense, Jasmine. You are sweating. Is there something you want to tell me? I forced a smile and touched my cheek, feigning embarrassment. I told him that of course I was tense. I told him that hosting a gala with less than 24 hours' notice would make anyone sweat. I reached out and adjusted his tie, playing the role of the devoted wife to perfection. I said I just wanted everything to be perfect for him and his partners. Darius studied my face for a second longer, searching for a lie. Then the tension in his shoulders dropped. He laughed, a low, smooth sound that did not reach his eyes. He said I worry too much. He said that is why he loves me. Dinner was an exercise in psychological torture. We sat at the long mahogany dining table, the three of us spaced out like strangers. Darius sat at the head, looking like a king holding court. I sat to his right and Trey was positioned on his left. I had to feed Trey his dinner spoonful by spoonful while Darius watched. It was humiliating for Trey and heartbreaking for me, but we had to maintain the charade. Darius cut into his steak, the knife scraping against the china with a screech that made me flinch. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and then set his fork down. He looked at me across the candlelight. It is still bothering me, Jasmine. The gas. I froze the spoon halfway to Trey's mouth. I kept my hand steady through sheer force of will. I asked him what he meant. Darius took a sip of his red wine, his eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the glass. He said it is just unlike me to be so careless. He said I am the woman who color codes her closet. I am the woman who balances checkbooks for fun. Leaving a 6-burner stove on full blast does not fit the profile. I lowered the spoon and looked at him. I channeled every ounce of innocence I possessed. I told him I was distracted. I told him I was missing him. Darius leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. He said that distraction is dangerous. He said that accidents happen when we least expect them. He told me a story about a client of his who died last year. Carbon monoxide poisoning. He said the poor man just went to sleep and never woke up. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a caress, but felt like a blade. Life is so fragile, Jasmine. You have to be careful. One mistake, one open valve, and everything you love disappears. I would hate to lose you. It would be such a tragedy. I stared at him, seeing the monster beneath the expensive suit. He was not warning me. He was taunting me. He was telling me exactly how he planned to kill me, enjoying the fear he thought he was instilling. He thought he was the cat playing with a mouse. He did not know the mouse had a camera recording his every threat. I picked up my wine glass, my hand steady. I looked him dead in the eye. You are right, Darius. We never know what tomorrow brings. We should cherish every moment we have left. He smiled, thinking I was submitting to his dominance. He raised his glass. To us, he said, and to the future. I clinked my glass against his. To the future, I repeated. I drank the wine, tasting the bitterness on my tongue. He thought the future belonged to him. He thought he was flying to Brazil with his mistress. But as I looked at the hidden camera blinking silently in the eye of the teddy bear on the shelf behind him, I knew the truth. His future was a 6x8 cell. And dinner was almost over. Darius wiped his mouth with the linen napkin and placed it on the table with deliberate precision. The small talk about gas leaks and accidents was over. His face shifted from the mask of the concerned husband to the mask of the ruthless businessman. He looked at Trey, then at me, and finally dropped the bombshell that confirmed my worst fears. I have arranged a private ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton for tomorrow night, he announced. His voice was not asking for permission. It was a command. I have invited the top 20 donors from the Foundation's platinum list. These are men with deep pockets and heavy consciences. They want to feel like heroes. Tomorrow night we are going to give them that chance. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. He explained that this was not just a social gathering. It was a strategic strike. He claimed that the Foundation had an opportunity to break ground on a new rehabilitation wing, a project that would cement his legacy in Atlanta forever. But he needed capital, and he needed it immediately. I need $2 million in pledged donations by midnight tomorrow, Darius said, his eyes glittering with greed. Cash transfers, no checks, no long-term payment plans. I told them we have a matching grant that expires on Sunday morning. It creates urgency. I took a sip of water to hide my shaking hands. It was the perfect cover story. The matching grant lie explained why he needed the money right now. It explained why the funds had to be moved instantly. $2 million. That was the golden parachute. That was the price of his new life with Rebecca in Rio. He was going to drain the donors dry and vanish before the concrete was even poured for this imaginary building. Darius stood up and walked over to Trey. He grabbed the back of the wheelchair and spun it around so Trey was facing him. He crouched down, bringing his face level with his son. "This is all on you, Trey," he said, his voice dropping to a serious coaching tone. "You need to sell it. I do not want the brave soldier act tomorrow. I want the suffering child. I want you to look tired. I want you to look like you are losing hope." Darius reached out and physically slumped Trey's shoulders forward. He messed up Trey's hair, making him look disheveled. "When you get on that stage, I want you to talk about the pain. Tell them how hard it is to wake up every day and not be able to move. Tell them that this new center is your only chance to ever walk again. Can you cry?" Trey stared at his father. His hands were clenched in his lap, but his face remained impassive. "I can try," Trey whispered. Darius sighed, clearly annoyed by the lack of enthusiasm. "You better do more than try. If we do not get that money, the foundation goes under. And if the foundation goes under, you go to the state home. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Trey said. Darius patted his cheek. It was a slap disguised as a caress. "Good. I want you to wear the gray suit. It makes you look paler. Jasmine, make sure he does not eat much tomorrow. I want him looking gaunt." I nodded, feeling a wave of nausea. He was directing a tragedy. He was orchestrating his son's humiliation to fund his own escape. Darius stood up and checked his watch. "I have calls to make to secure the venue. Go to bed early. Tomorrow is a work day." He walked out of the dining room, whistling a low tune. I looked at Trey. The hatred in his eyes was a terrifying thing to behold. We had our marching orders. We were going to the Ritz. But Darius didn't know that the script he had written was about to be rewritten by the very actors he thought he owned. The house had finally fallen silent, but sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Then I heard the faint hum of the garage door opener. It didn't open all the way, just enough for someone to slip under. I grabbed my phone and crept out of the bedroom, my bare feet making no sound on the runner. I moved toward the mudroom that connected the kitchen to the garage. I pressed my back against the wall next to the door. It was slightly ajar. I could hear the low murmur of voices. It was Darius. And Rebecca. She must have parked down the street and walked back to avoid waking me. I held my breath and hit record on my phone, sliding it carefully toward the gap in the door frame. Rebecca sounded anxious. She asked if the gala was really happening. She asked if the flight was still confirmed for Sunday morning. Darius laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete floor. He told her to relax. He said everything was in motion. He said the plane tickets were ready and the money was waiting in the Cayman account. But then the conversation shifted to Trey. "I need the new vial," Darius said. "The stuff you brought last week is not strong enough." He was too alert at dinner. He was tracking me with his eyes. If he tries to speak on stage, if he tries to make a scene, we are finished. There was a pause. The sound of a zipper opening, likely Rebecca's bag. "This is a fresh batch," Rebecca whispered. "But you have to be careful, Darius." I increased the sedative concentration. "It is meant for large livestock." Darius interrupted her. He did not care about safety. He asked how much he should give him. Rebecca hesitated. She said 5 milligrams is the maximum safe dose for his weight. Anything more could suppress his respiratory drive. She said he could stop breathing. Darius made a dismissive noise. He told her that he wanted a show. He said that a half-asleep boy is boring. He said he wanted a tragic figure. He said he wanted the audience to look at Trey and see a broken angel. "I am going to give him 10 milligrams, Darius said. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop the scream rising in my throat. 10 milligrams, double the lethal dose. Rebecca gasped. She told him that was insanity. She said 10 milligrams would not just paralyze him, it would shut down his diaphragm. She said he would suffocate in front of 500 people. Darius's voice turned cold, devoid of any humanity. "If he dies, he dies. Think about it, Becca. If the poor, tragic boy passes away on stage while pleading for help, the donations will not just stop, they will skyrocket. The sympathy money will be astronomical. We will be grieving heroes. We can start a memorial fund in his name and drain that too before we leave. It is a win-win." Silence hung in the garage. It was heavy and suffocating. I waited for Rebecca to argue. I waited for her to defend her nephew. I waited for a shred of decency. "Just make sure it looks like an accident," she finally whispered. I pulled the phone back, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. They were not just planning to drug him. They were discussing his murder as a backup business strategy. I had the recording. I had the proof of conspiracy to commit murder. But I realized with terrifying clarity that I could not just wait for the police anymore. If Darius injected Trey tomorrow night, my stepson would not survive the ambulance ride. I had to stop the needle before it ever touched his skin. The sound of the shower turning on was my starting gun. I stood outside the heavy oak door of the master bathroom, pressing my ear against the wood. The pipes groaned and the steady hiss of water hitting tiles filled the silence. Darius took long, scalding showers. I calculated I had 7 minutes. 7 minutes to save my stepson's life. I took a deep breath, checked the pocket of my robe to ensure the decoy vial was there, and turned the handle. The bathroom was already filling with steam. It clung to the mirrors and made the marble floor slick. Through the frosted glass of the shower enclosure, I could see the blurred silhouette of my husband. He was humming to himself. It was a cheerful tune, the sound of a man who thought he had won. I moved silently across the cold floor, my bare feet making no sound. My target was the distressed leather toiletry bag sitting on the vanity next to the sink. It was Darius's travel kit, the one he always packed for trips, but he had left it out in preparation for the medical emergency at the gala. I reached for the zipper. It was stiff. I pulled it slowly, praying it would not snag or rasp. The sound seemed deafening in the small room, but the noise of the shower masked it. I opened the bag wide. There, nestled between a razor and a bottle of cologne, was the blue vial. I picked it up. It felt heavy. It felt like death. This was the 10 milligram dose Rebecca had delivered. This was the weapon that was supposed to stop Trey's heart on stage tomorrow night. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to steady. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the identical blue vial I had prepared in the kitchen while they were talking in the garage. I had cleaned an old empty vial and filled it with sterile saline solution and water. I had spent an hour carefully peeling the label off an old bottle and gluing it onto this one. To the naked eye, they were twins. I placed the lethal vial in my pocket and dropped the saline solution into the leather bag. I nudged it with my finger, positioning it exactly the way the original had been tilted slightly against the cologne. Suddenly, the water stopped. The silence crashed into the room instantly. The humming stopped. I froze. My hand was still inside the bag. Darius coughed, the sound echoing wet and loud. I heard the latch of the shower door click. Panic surged through me like an electric shock. I yanked my hand back and zipped the bag shut in one fluid motion. I did not have time to check if the zipper pull was in the exact same spot. I spun around, my heart hammering against my throat, and looked for an exit. If I ran for the door, he might see my shadow. I dropped to the floor. I crawled under the vanity, squeezing myself into the small gap between the cabinet and the hamper. The shower door swung open. Steam billowed out. Darius stepped onto the bath mat. I held my breath, pressing my hand over my nose to stop myself from sneezing. I could see his wet feet. He walked to the sink. He stood inches from where I was hiding. Water dripped from his body onto the floor, landing just near my hand. He reached out and grabbed a towel. Then I heard the sound of the zipper. He was checking. I closed my eyes. If he noticed the difference, if he saw the liquid was slightly clearer or the label was slightly crooked, I was dead. There was a pause. A long, agonizing silence. "Perfect," he whispered. The zipper closed. He walked out of the bathroom, whistling that same cheerful tune. I stayed on the floor for a full minute, clutching the vial of poison in my pocket, tears of relief stinging my eyes. The switch was made. Tomorrow night, Darius would plunge a needle into his son's leg, expecting a tragedy. Instead, he was going to get a miracle. The morning sun sliced through the windows of the living room, exposing every dust mote dancing in the air. It felt like a spotlight. I was steaming Trey's gray suit, the steam rising in clouds that hid my terrified face. Rebecca was pacing near the kitchen island. She was already dressed in a blood-red gown that looked like an open wound. She was agitated. She was checking everything twice. She walked over to the side table where Darius had left his leather toiletry bag. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was where I had planted the saline solution. Rebecca picked up the bag. She did not just look at it, she unzipped it. I kept the steamer moving, the hissing sound masking the shallow gasps of my breathing. I watched her through the corner of my eye. Her fingers, tipped with sharp crimson nails, reached inside. She pulled out the blue vial. I stopped breathing. She held the vial up to the light, squinting. She was a pharmacist. She handled these bottles every day. She knew the weight, the texture, the gloss of the label. She turned the bottle slowly in her hand. "Something is wrong," she muttered. I forced myself to turn around. I asked her what she meant, keeping my voice light and uninterested. She frowned, running her thumb over the edge of the label. The corner was peeling slightly. I had glued it on with a craft stick in the middle of the night, and the humidity from the shower must have loosened the adhesive. "The label," she said, her eyes narrowing. "It is crooked, and it feels damp. Did you open this, Jasmine?" The room started to spin. If she peeled that label back, she would see the residue of the old label underneath. She would see that the seal had been tampered with. She would know. I gripped the handle of the steamer until my hand cramped. I had to lie. I had to lie perfectly. I told her I dropped the bag this morning. I said I spilled some toner on the counter and tried to wipe it off. I told her I might have gotten the bottle wet. Rebecca did not look convinced. She brought the vial closer to her face, sniffing the cap. She was looking for the scent of glue. She was looking for a reason to destroy me. Her thumb dug under the loose corner of the paper. She was about to rip it off. Rebecca Darius's voice boomed from the top of the stairs. It was impatient and loud. "Where are the car keys? The driver is waiting outside and I cannot find the spare set." Rebecca jumped. Her focus snapped away from the bottle. She looked up at the ceiling, annoyance flashing across her face. She looked back at the vial one last time, then at me. The suspicion was still there, burning in her eyes, but the command from her master was stronger. She dropped the vial back into the bag and zipped it shut with a vicious yank. "We will talk about your clumsiness later," she hissed. She grabbed her clutch and stormed toward the stairs to help Darius. I waited until she turned the corner. I let out a breath that felt like a scream. I looked at the leather bag. The weapon was still in place. The saline was packed. But I knew that look in her eyes. She did not trust me. And tonight she would be watching my every move. I finished steaming the suit, my hands trembling. It was time to go to the ball. The black dress I had chosen for the funeral of my marriage felt like armor against my skin, but my hands were still trembling as I clasped the pearl necklace around my neck. I checked the time on my phone. It was 10 in the morning. I needed to send a confirmation text to Sarah, the teacher, and Lisa, the toxicologist. They were my cavalry waiting for the signal to storm the Ritz-Carlton tonight. I unlocked the screen, my thumb hovering over the messaging app. "Give it to me." The voice came from the doorway, low and commanding. I jumped, nearly dropping the device. Darius was standing there, leaning against the doorframe. He was already dressed in his tuxedo, looking every inch the benevolent philanthropist. But his eyes were cold, fixed on the phone in my hand. I forced a confused smile. "What do you mean, honey?" "Your phone," Darius said, walking into the room. He held out his hand, palm up. "I want everyone's devices. Yours? Trey's, even Rebecca's." My heart skipped a beat. I clutched the phone tighter. I asked him why. I told him I needed to coordinate with the caterers. I told him my mother might call. Darius shook his head, his expression hardening. He explained that tonight is too important for distractions. He said that the press will be there. He said he does not want a photo of his wife scrolling through Instagram or texting during his speech to end up on the morning news. He said we need to present a united, focused front. It was a lie. It was a power move. He wanted to isolate us. He wanted to make sure that if things went wrong, we had no way to call for help. I hesitated. The signal. If I did not send the confirmation code to Sarah, she might not come. If I could not access the cloud server to monitor the cameras I had installed, I would be flying blind. Darius took a step closer. His hand did not move. "Do not make me ask twice, Jasmine. Trust is a two-way street. Show me you are with me." The threat was implicit. If I refused, he would know I was hiding something. If I fought him now, the whole plan would collapse before we even left the house. I had to choose between my lifeline and my cover. I let out a shaky breath and placed my phone in his hand. "Thank you," he said, slipping it into his jacket pocket. He patted it, a smug smile playing on his lips. "I will keep these safe until the after party. Now go get the boy. The limo is here." I watched him walk away, feeling a wave of panic rise in my chest. I was cut off. I had no way to reach the outside world. I had no way to warn the police if the timeline changed. I was walking into a trap with no communication, no backup, and a husband who was planning a murder. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back was terrified, but she was also cornered, and a cornered animal has nothing left to lose. I straightened my shoulders. I did not need a phone to end him. I just needed the truth, and tonight I was going to serve it to him on a silver platter. The gray suit hung on Trey's frame like a shroud. It was a size too big, a deliberate choice by Darius to make his son look withered and frail. I walked into his bedroom and closed the door softly behind me. The air in the house felt heavy, charged with the static of the impending storm. Trey sat in his wheelchair by the window, staring at the driveway, where the stretch limousine idled like a hearse. He did not look at me when I entered. He was deep in the zone, mentally preparing for the performance of his life. I knelt beside him and took his cold hands in mine. This was it. The final quiet moment before the chaos began. I checked the hallway one last time to ensure Darius was not lurking in the shadows. Then I leaned in close, my lips brushing against his ear. "I need you to listen to me," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. Trey turned his head. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. He was waiting for the plan. He knew I had switched the vials, but he did not know the endgame. "Tonight is going to be different," I said, squeezing his hands to anchor him. "Darius is going to inject you right before you go on stage. He thinks he is giving you a sedative that will stop your breathing. He thinks you will slump over and die in front of the cameras." Trey flinched, his breath hitching in his throat. "But he is wrong," I continued, my voice fierce and steady. I swapped the bottle. "It is just salt water. You are going to feel the needle, but you will not feel the poison. You will stay awake, you will stay strong. And when he wheels you out into that spotlight, he will expect a corpse." I reached up and straightened his tie, looking him dead in the eye. "I am going to be standing stage left. When I drop my clutch, that is your signal. Do not hesitate, do not look at him, do not look at the crowd." I paused, letting the weight of the instructions sink in. "You stand up, Trey. You stand up and you run. You run as fast as you can toward the light. You run toward the cameras. You show them the miracle Darius tried to hide. You show them that you are not broken. You shatter his lie with every step you take." Trey looked at his legs, the legs he had been forced to drag for years. Then he looked back at me. A fire ignited in his eyes. It was the look of a prisoner realizing the cage door was unlocked. "I will run," he whispered back. "I will run until I cannot breathe." I kissed his forehead, sealing the pact. The door handle turned. I stood up instantly, smoothing my dress and stepping back just as Darius walked in. "Time to go," Darius said, clapping his hands together. "The donors are waiting." I looked at my husband, then at my son. We walked out of the room, a perfect tragic family heading to a party. But Darius did not know that he was not bringing a victim to the slaughter. He was bringing a wolf dressed in gray wool. The partition glass slid up with a soft hiss, sealing us off from the driver. To the outside world, this limousine was a carriage carrying Atlanta's most philanthropic family to their crowning achievement. Inside it was a rolling prison cell. The air smelled of expensive leather and the scotch Darius kept pouring from the crystal decanter. I sat facing the rear, my knees brushing against Trey's wheelchair, which was locked into the floor tracks. Darius sat next to me. He was not looking at us. He was staring out the tinted window at the city passing by, his reflection ghosting against the glass. He looked calm, but I could feel the energy radiating off him. It was a vibrating, violent tension. He was a gambler walking into a casino to bet his entire life on a single hand. Suddenly his hand shot out and clamped over mine, resting on the seat. It was not a hold. It was a vice. His fingers dug into my knuckles, grinding bone against bone. The pain was sharp and immediate, shooting up my arm like a lightning bolt. I gasped, the sound involuntary, but I did not pull away. I knew better. Resistance only made him squeeze harder. He turned to me slowly, a smile playing on his lips that did not reach his dead cold eyes. "You are trembling, Jasmine," he whispered. "Stop it. Trembling looks like guilt, and tonight we are innocent." He increased the pressure. My ring dug into my adjacent finger, cutting the skin. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I forced them back. "Listen to me closely," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Tonight has to be flawless. No mistakes, no hesitation. You smile, you wave, you look at that boy with pity." He glanced at Trey, who was staring at his lap, motionless. Darius leaned back into my personal space, his cologne filling my nose, suffocating me. "If you trip, if you stutter, if you do anything to make those donors close their checkbooks, the boy does not go to a state home. He simply vanishes." Do you understand? No body, no funeral, just gone. I will bury him so deep that even the worms will not find him. I looked at Trey. I saw his jaw tighten. He heard every word. The threat was real. Darius was telling me that murder was not just a plan B, it was a promise if I failed him. I looked back at the man I had married and nodded, swallowing the scream that was clawing at my throat. I understand, I choked out. He released my hand instantly as the car slowed. He smoothed the fabric of his tuxedo jacket, the monster disappearing behind the mask of the benefactor. He picked up his glass and finished the scotch in one swallow. Good, he said. Smile, darling. It is showtime. The limousine came to a halt. The door opened, the flashbulbs erupted like gunfire, blinding us with white light. I stepped out onto the red carpet, my hand throbbing, my heart racing, walking straight into the arena. The world exploded into a blinding strobe of white light as we stepped onto the pavement. The roar of the crowd hit me like a physical wave. There were photographers 3 rows deep, jostling for position behind the velvet ropes. They shouted Darius's name with the fervor of religious zealots greeting a messiah. Darius did not just walk into the chaos. He glided. The transformation was instant and terrifying. The veins that had been bulging in his neck moments ago smoothed out. The snarl was replaced by a look of humble determination. He reached his hand out to me, palm up, the picture of a chivalrous gentleman. I took it. I had no choice. His skin was warm now, but I could still feel the phantom pain of his crushing grip on my knuckles from the car ride. I stepped out of the limousine, forcing the muscles in my face to contract into a smile. It felt brittle, like a mask made of dried clay that might crack at any moment. Darius turned his attention to the wheelchair lift. The cameras went wild. The shutter clicks sounded like a swarm of mechanical locusts. He knelt down, unlatching Trey's chair with exaggerated care, treating his son like a piece of porcelain that might shatter. He whispered something in Trey's ear that looked like encouragement to the audience, but I knew it was a final warning. He wheeled Trey down the ramp, pausing at the bottom so the photographers could get the money shot. The devoted father, the tragic son, the supportive wife. We were the perfect American family, framed in gold and sold to the highest bidder. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal shouted from the press pen, thrusting a microphone over the rope. He asked why the sudden urgency for the event and if there was an update on Trey's condition. Darius stopped. He looked solemn. He placed a hand on Trey's shoulder. He looked directly into the camera lens with practiced gravity. "Time is a luxury we do not have," he said, his voice projecting perfectly without a microphone. "My son's condition is deteriorating. We have a narrow window to build this rehabilitation wing. If we wait, we lose. And I refuse to lose my son to this chair." The crowd murmured in sympathy. A woman in the front row wiped a tear from her eye. I felt bile rise in my throat. He was using the very poison he had been injecting into Trey as the marketing hook for the cure he never intended to build. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I gripped my silver clutch so hard the metal edges dug into my palm. Inside that small bag was not lipstick or a compact. It held the USB drive with the affair photos, the audio recording of him calling Trey an ATM, and the toxicology report from the lab. It was a grenade, and I was walking into the ballroom looking for the right moment to pull the pin. Darius placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding us toward the revolving gold doors of the hotel. His fingers pressed into my spine, a silent reminder of his power. "Keep smiling," he whispered through his teeth while waving to a donor. "You are doing great, honey. Just remember what is at stake. One wrong move and the boy disappears." I widened my smile, nodding at the cameras, as if I were the happiest woman alive. I walked into the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, clutching the evidence to my chest, ready to burn his kingdom to the ground. The crystal chandeliers dimmed, casting the ballroom into a hushed twilight. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium where Darius stood. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, the very image of stoic strength. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his head bowed for a moment of calculated silence. The room filled with Atlanta's elite held its breath. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. He began to speak, his voice a rich baritone that reached the back of the room without a microphone. He did not start with numbers or architectural plans. He started with a story. He spoke about the night of the accident. He described the rain, the screech of tires, and the silence that followed. He painted a vivid picture of pulling his wife from the wreckage, omitting the part where he strangled her against the steering wheel. He spoke of her last words, a fabrication about taking care of their son. "I stand here tonight not as a businessman," Darius said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I stand here as a father who made a promise to a dying woman. I promised her that our son would not just survive, but that he would live." He gestured to the side of the stage where Trey sat in his wheelchair, bathed in a softer light. The crowd turned their heads. I watched from the shadows of the wings, my stomach churning. For 4 years, I have watched this boy fight a battle no child should have to fight. Darius continued. I have watched the light fade from his eyes as his muscles atrophy. I have watched him try to take a step only to fall. And every time he falls, a piece of my heart breaks. But we do not stay down. We get back up. He paused to wipe a tear from his cheek. It was a masterclass in acting. The room was captivated. I saw women dabbing their eyes with handkerchiefs. I saw men nodding solemnly, reaching for their checkbooks. They were buying the lie. They were paying for the performance. Darius leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a whisper. But love is not enough. Hope is not enough. We need science. We need medicine. The new wing we are building is not just a building. It is a lifeline. It is the only thing standing between my son and a life of permanent darkness. I am asking you to help me keep my promise. I am asking you to save my son. Thunderous applause erupted. It started as a ripple and turned into a roar. Darius bowed his head humbly, accepting the adoration. I looked out into the front row. Rebecca was standing there. She was not crying. She was beaming. She nodded at him, a slow, deliberate movement. It was a look of shared triumph. They had done it. They had hooked the whales. I tightened my grip on my clutch. They thought the applause was for them. They thought the night was over. But as Darius turned to walk toward Trey for the finale, I took a step forward from the darkness. The speech was just the prologue. The real story was about to begin. The applause washed over the stage like a physical force. Darius stood in the center of the spotlight, soaking it in his chest, heaving with the exertion of his performance. He turned to the wings where I was standing, his smile widening into something that looked welcoming to the audience, but predatory to me. He extended his hand, palm up, inviting me into the lion's den. And now he announced, his voice booming through the speakers. I want to invite my wife Jasmine to the stage. She is the backbone of this family. She is the mother who stepped in when my son had no one. Come here, darling. I took a deep breath. The air in the ballroom was cold, but my skin felt hot. I tightened my grip on the silver clutch and stepped out of the shadows. The light hit me, instantly blinding and hot. I walked up the 3 stairs to the stage, my heels clicking on the wood. Every step felt like a drumbeat of war. I walked toward him. I did not look at the crowd. I looked only at the podium where the laptop controlling the presentation sat. Darius put his arm around my waist as I reached him. He pulled me close, his fingers digging into my hip, a silent reminder of his threat in the car. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, blocking the audience's view of his face. Keep it short, he hissed into my ear. Cry if you can. He pulled back, smiling at me with dead eyes, and handed me the microphone. I took it. I felt the weight of it in my hand. It was not just a microphone. It was a weapon. I stepped up to the podium. Darius stepped back, crossing his arms, confident that I was about to deliver the eulogy for his living son. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the wealthy donors. I saw the tearful socialites. I saw Rebecca in the front row, looking smug. I looked at the laptop screen. It was currently displaying a black and white photo of Trey looking sad in a hospital bed. I placed my clutch on the podium. I opened it. Darius frowned. He took a half step forward, confused. He thought I was reaching for a tissue. Instead, I pulled out the silver USB drive. I plugged it into the side of the laptop. Darius froze. He saw the movement. He saw the flash of silver. He did not understand yet, but his instincts were screaming. I tapped the keyboard, closing his presentation and opening the folder labeled Evidence. The screen behind me flickered. The sad photo of Trey vanished. The room went silent. I leaned into the microphone. My voice did not shake. It was steady. It was cold. It was the voice of the prosecutor I was born to be. "My husband just told you a beautiful story," I said. "He told you a story about sacrifice. He told you a story about love. He told you that he is a hero saving his son from a tragedy." I looked over my shoulder at the giant screen behind me. I clicked the first file. The photo of the fake passports appeared magnified 10 feet high. "But I want to tell you a different story." I continued staring directly at Rebecca in the front row. "I want to tell you a story about greed. I want to tell you a story about murder, and I want to show you exactly where your money is really going." The image of the fake passports on the screen caused a ripple of confusion to spread through the room, but it was not enough to shatter the illusion. People were whispering, squinting, trying to understand if this was part of the presentation. Darius saw the passports and his face drained of color. He took a step toward me, his hands reaching out not to embrace me but to silence me. "Technological glitch," he shouted, forcing a laugh that sounded like a bark. "My wife is not tech-savvy. Let me fix that." He lunged for the laptop. I sidestepped him, blocking the keyboard with my body. I looked him in the eye. "You wanted a show, Darius," I said into the microphone. "Here it is." I hit the spacebar. The video file opened instantly. It was the footage I had pulled from the cloud server of his car, the internal dash camera recording I had saved. The giant screen filled with a close-up of Darius's face. He was driving, talking on the phone to Rebecca. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the hotel's massive sound system. It boomed off the walls, silencing every whisper in the room. Darius's voice on screen was casual, chillingly relaxed. "Vanessa was weak," the digital Darius said, laughing as he merged onto the highway. "She should have just signed the insurance papers. I did her a favor by helping her hit that tree. She never had the stomach for the big game." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the ballroom. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. 500 people froze. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to mouths. The waiters stopped moving. The video continued. The on-screen Darius adjusted his rearview mirror. "And the kid? He is a gold mine. As long as he stays in that chair, the checks keep clearing. He is not a son. He is an ATM with wheels. But I am tired of the maintenance. Once we get the gala money, I will give him the final dose. He will go to sleep and Daddy will go to Rio." The video ended. The screen went black. For 2 seconds there was absolute silence, the kind of silence that follows a gunshot. Then the room erupted. It started with a woman screaming in the back row. Then chairs scraped loudly against the floor as donors jumped to their feet. The shock turned into outrage instantly. Darius stood in the middle of the stage, frozen. He looked at the blank screen, then at the audience. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The mask had not just slipped, it had been incinerated. He looked at the front row. Rebecca was gone. She had bolted the moment the video started. I leaned into the microphone one last time, my voice echoed over the chaos. "He killed his wife, and tonight he planned to kill his son right here in front of you," Darius snapped. The shock vanished, replaced by a feral rage. He roared a sound that was not human and charged at me. His hands were curled into claws, reaching for my throat. "You bitch!" he screamed. "I will kill you!" He was 5 feet away. I did not run. I dropped the microphone and looked toward the side of the stage. "Now, Trey," I shouted. "Run!" Darius was a blur of black tuxedo and white rage. His hands were inches from my neck, his face contorted into a mask of pure violence. He had forgotten the audience. He had forgotten the cameras. He only wanted to destroy the woman who had just ended his life. I did not flinch. I looked past him, locking eyes with the boy in the wheelchair. "Stand up, Trey," I screamed. "End this!" The command cracked through the ballroom like a whip. Darius hesitated for a fraction of a second, the sound of his son's name piercing his blind fury. He started to turn his head. It was the last mistake he would ever make. In the peripheral vision of 500 stunned guests, a miracle happened. The boy who had been wheeled onto the stage, the boy whose legs were supposed to be useless dead weight, planted his feet on the floor. Trey gripped the armrests of the chair. With a guttural roar that had been building in his chest for 4 years, he launched himself upward. He did not just stand, he exploded into motion. The saline solution had done its job. His muscles were weak from years of atrophy, but they were awake and they were fueled by a hatred hot enough to melt steel. Darius turned fully just in time to see his victim towering over him. His eyes went wide, the color draining from his face, as if he were seeing a ghost. "You!" Darius gasped. Trey did not speak. He swung his right leg back, channeling every ounce of pain, every night of terror, every drop of the poison he had been forced to endure into a single motion. He kicked, his foot connected squarely with Darius's chest. It was not a graceful strike. It was a messy, desperate, powerful blow. The force of it caught Darius completely off guard. He stumbled back, his arms windmilling, trying to find balance that was not there. He tripped over the microphone stand I had dropped. Darius Sterling, the untouchable titan of industry, crashed to the stage floor with a heavy, satisfying thud. He slid across the polished wood, coming to a stop at the very edge of the platform, humiliated and broken. The ballroom went dead silent. Not a breath was drawn. Trey stood in the center of the spotlight. He was shaking violently, his legs trembling under his own weight, but he was standing. He looked down at the man who had crippled him. He straightened his oversized suit jacket, looked out at the sea of gaping faces, and spoke into the silence. "I am not an ATM father. I am your son, and I am done paying your bills." Then the screaming started. But this time it was not fear. It was the sound of justice arriving at the speed of light. Flashbulbs erupted, capturing the image that would be on every front page in America by morning. The boy standing tall, the monster on his knees. The war was over. The silence that followed Trey's declaration was shattered by the sound of heavy oak doors crashing open. It wasn't the polite entrance of late guests. It was a raid. A dozen uniformed officers and 2 detectives in Kevlar vests swarmed into the ballroom, their weapons drawn but lowered. The flash of red and blue lights from the patrol cars outside pulsed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the elegant gala into a crime scene. Darius tried to scramble to his feet, a pathetic, desperate movement, but he was too slow. 2 officers vaulted onto the stage. They didn't ask him to surrender. They slammed him back down, his face pressing hard into the polished wood floor where he had planned to celebrate his victory. "Darius Sterling, you are under arrest for the murder of Vanessa Sterling and the attempted murder of Trey Sterling." A detective shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Darius writhed, spitting curses, but the metal handcuffs ratcheted shut around his wrists with a finality that echoed in the microphone he had dropped. The King of Atlanta was in chains. At the back of the room, a high-pitched scream drew everyone's attention. Rebecca had almost made it to the revolving doors. She was clawing at a female officer who had blocked her path. The composure she had maintained for years disintegrated instantly. She wasn't the cool, calculated mistress anymore. She was a cornered animal. "It was him," she shrieked, her face twisted and ugly. She pointed a shaking finger at the stage. "He made me do it. I was scared. He threatened to kill me too. I am just a pharmacist. I didn't want to hurt the boy." Her betrayal was instant and absolute. Darius lifted his head from the floor, watching his partner sell him out to save her own skin. The look of pure hatred that passed between them was colder than any prison cell. The police dragged Rebecca away, her red dress trailing on the carpet like a smear of blood. On the stage, the adrenaline that had fueled Trey's miracle began to fade. His legs, unused to supporting his weight for so long, started to buckle. He swayed, his eyes rolling back slightly. I moved before he could fall. I caught him wrapping my arms around his waist, and we sank to the floor together. We didn't care about the cameras flashing like lightning storms around us. We didn't care about the stunned donors whispering in the dark. Trey buried his face in my shoulder. The stoic mask he had worn for 4 years finally cracked. He let out a sob that sounded like it was tearing him apart. It was a raw, guttural sound of release. He cried for his mother. He cried for the pain. He cried for the childhood that had been stolen from him. I held him tight, rocking him back and forth, my own tears soaking into his gray suit. "It is over," I whispered into his hair over and over again like a mantra. "He cannot hurt you. You are safe. We won, Trey. We won." Trey gripped the back of my dress, his fingers digging in as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved. For the first time in forever, he wasn't trembling from fear or weakness. He was trembling because he was finally truly free. The rhythmic thud of orange rubber hitting the pavement was the sweetest song I had ever heard. It was better than any symphony, better than the applause of any gala. I stood on the edge of the driveway, squinting against the bright summer sun, watching the boy who was told he would never walk again dribble a basketball. Trey moved with a slight limp, a lingering reminder of the atrophy that had nearly stolen his legs, but he was moving. He wore shorts that revealed calves that were gaining muscle definition every day. He pivoted on his left foot, gritted his teeth in concentration, and launched the ball toward the hoop we had installed over the garage. It banked off the backboard and swished through the net. "Nothing but net," he shouted, throwing his arms up in victory. I laughed, tossing him a water bottle. He caught it with reflexes that were sharp and alive. It had been 6 months since the police dragged Darius and Rebecca out of the Ritz-Carlton. The trial was swift and brutal. The video evidence I played on that stage left no room for defense lawyers to maneuver. Darius was currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Rebecca took a plea deal for 20 years in exchange for testifying against him, but her life as she knew it was over. They were rotting in concrete cells while we were out here in the sun. I walked over and ruffled Trey's hair. He didn't flinch anymore. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by the typical annoyance of a teenager being mothered. We had sold the house of horrors. We couldn't live within those walls where the gas had leaked and the cameras had watched us. We bought a place with big windows and no hidden safes. As for the hotel empire, it was still ours. But the foundation was no longer a shell for money laundering. I had fired the entire board and rebuilt it from the ground up. We renamed it the Vanessa Sterling Initiative. It was now a genuine advocacy group and shelter for children suffering from domestic abuse and medical neglect. We were using Darius's blood money to save the very children he would have despised. Trey took a long drink of water and looked at me. "Do you think he knows?" Trey asked quietly. "Do you think he knows I am playing basketball?" I smiled, a fierce, protective thing. "I made sure his lawyer sent him a picture," I said. "I wanted him to see that he failed." Trey nodded, satisfied. He picked up the ball again. One-on-one, he challenged. "I will go easy on you since you are old." I kicked off my sandals and stepped onto the asphalt. "I am going to destroy you, kid." We played until the sun went down, sweating, laughing, and living the life that was almost stolen from us. We had walked through the fire and came out the other side not as victims, but as survivors. But our story is just one of many. There are secrets hidden behind closed doors in every neighborhood. There are voices that are being silenced right now. If this story moved you, if you felt the anger and the triumph, do not keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment below about a time you had to stand up for the truth when everyone else was blind. Your voice is powerful. Use it. Subscribe for more stories of justice. And remember, sometimes the only way to win is to rewrite the script yourself. The haunting saga of Jasmine and Trey reminds us that evil often underestimates the resilience of those it seeks to control. Darius saw a helpless child and a naive wife, blind to the warriors growing right beneath his roof. It proves that truth is a force that cannot be buried forever. No matter how carefully a lie is constructed, it only takes one moment of courage to tear it down. True strength isn't about never getting hurt. It's about standing up when the world expects you to stay down. If this victory for justice moved, you hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of triumph against the odds.